Hello and welcome back to Exploring Psychology Through Science Fiction. Today we're talking about Spock versus Kirk, or logic versus emotion. So this week we watched Star Trek and Farscape. I had to watch Star Trek because it's a great movie, but also because of that very first scene. Um, Spock is attempting to perform the ritual of Kolinar. Now, Vulcans have struggled with extremely powerful emotions throughout their history. So they worked very hard to develop techniques to suppress those emotions. And while most Vulcans are able to maintain control over their emotions, the ritual of Kolinar is intended to purge all emotions out of their system. Now, Spock was unable to complete the ritual, supposedly because of his human blood. But his goal, and the goal of most Vulcans, is to completely eliminate emotion from all of their decisions from their lives. Um, and that's what they perceive as being um, a higher way of functioning. Now, on the other side of it, we watched an episode of Farscape, and if you've never seen this show, I threw you right in there into the middle of it, but this was a perfect example for this week's topic. If you haven't seen it, it's one of my favorite TV shows. I'd encourage you to watch it from the beginning. Hopefully it won't go off on Netflix too early. Now, with this episode, we see the main character, John Crichton, is enveloped in this ball of energy. Um, he pops out and doesn't remember what happened to him, but right after that, out pops this monster or beast. Now we find out that this is a de-evolved version of Crichton. And then a little bit later, out pops another Crichton. This one is a possible future evolution of him. So we've got the de-evolved emotional versus the evolved logical, as well as how we humans are today. And the story is that future John wants to. The ball of energy is a vessel, and it has to take one of the Crichtons back, or it'll end up destroying the whole ship. So future John says we have to sacrifice the beast because he's the logical choice. He's the least valuable. Now, the original John, says that's not right. We can't sacrifice him, but he's struggling with it. And what ends up happening is future John tries to force the issue. Original John can't take out future John or Beast John, but luckily those two take care of it. The Beast kills the future John, and it's a happy ending. But the message is that the least evolved version of humans, or the emotional one, is the only one that knew from the beginning the right thing to do. So here were two different perspectives on the importance of emotions versus logic, and what's more valuable. Now, what I want to talk about is how we today use both logic and emotions in our decision-making processes. Now, decision-making is a cognitive process that we're thinking about, where we have to decide between two or more choices or alternatives. And all of us tend to have different preferences as to which approach we tend to take towards our decision making, whether it's more of a thinking or logical perspective, or a more feeling or emotional method for making our decisions. Now, when we're trying to focus on a logical, making a logical decision, the goal is to try to exclude emotions and use only rational methods. The focus is on utility. What's the best choice? What's the logical choice? And we tend to give value to each option, or assign weights, and set up some specific criteria on what's the best outcome and which decision gets us closest to that. So we try to make this very logical, rational decision, and the goal is to exclude any emotional aspect from it. Whereas on the other side, emotional decision making, there's quite a big range. From a completely emotional decision that's just more of a reaction, heat of the moment, almost a subconscious decision that we might see when we're in a heated argument or we're faced with immediate danger. It's more of that, what we tend to think of as that animal response, the fight or flight, or freeze. But it's an emotional decision. Now that's kind of one extreme. But the reason that when pressed with danger or emotion, that our decisions tend to be more emotional is because it takes more time for the rational frontal cortex to kick in. The emotions are seated more in the base of the brain, or the animal brain, and those happen quicker. So to think logically about something means we have to slow down, have to give ourselves the chance to think through it rationally, rather than reacting more immediately based on an emotional response. Now, more common emotional decisions will often tend to use some logic, but the main driving force is emotion. And that tends to override the logic, or we use a pseudo-logic, or we rationalize whatever we need to support an emotional choice. And then another common use of emotion in decisions is to start with logic and then use emotion to help make the final choice. Now, one aspect that we've seen in the research on decision making, and this has been done by Damasio, is that he looked at people who had damage to the part of the brain where emotions are generated. So they lost the ability to feel emotions, but all the other cognitive functioning was intact. And what he found was that these people's ability to make decisions was seriously impaired. So even though their logical, rational aspects were intact, without emotions, they couldn't make decisions. They couldn't logically describe what they should be doing. They could logically describe what they should be doing, but in practice, they couldn't make a decision. Well, where should I live? Well, that's not a clear-cut question with a very specific answer. There's positives and negatives to each decision. Where should we eat tonight? Well, I like this, but I like this. I don't like that part. I don't like that part. There's pros and cons to every choice, and it takes an emotional decision to come to our final answer. So without those emotions, we really can't make a final decision in what it turns out to be most situations. So even with what we believe are logical decisions, the point of where it's time to make a choice is arguably always based on emotion. So that's something to keep in mind when making decisions, is that we all have more of a slant that we take, whether it be focused on logical or emotional decision making, but we use both aspects in almost every decision, unless it's that immediate response when we're threatened or in the heat of the moment. So let's shift gears a little bit now and start looking at what you are. Are you more of a feeling person or more of a thinking person when it comes to decision making? And to do that, we're going to look at the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator. It is the name of an assessment that's been used in career assessment primarily, where you go through and answer a whole bunch of questions, and then it gives you a little readout on where you fall on these different scales and what types of jobs might fit your personality best. So we see that a lot in career assessment. Now that costs money to take that, and there's copyright issues, so I can't just post it for you. But what I did post was the Jung typology test, because Myers and Briggs based their assessment on some of Carl Jung's personality theories. So the one that I posted on the website for you is similar theoretically, and still gets at the different categories. So what they break it into is, are you more extroverted, out socializing, love to interact with people, or more introverted, where you want to isolate or just have a few friends but aren't so social. The second category is intuition versus sensing. Intuition is going with your gut. Sensing is based on your senses, what you actually perceive and observe. So is it do I go with my gut or I go by the facts? And then the third category is similar, which is perceiving and judging. And this is, are you based more on perceiving is kind of looking at not so much right or wrong, more ambiguous. Is that your take on things, or judging, which is more right and wrong. And then finally, the reason that I'm using this week is the fourth category is feeling or thinking. So how do you make decisions? Is it feeling, where you put more weight on personal concerns and the people involved, or more thinking, where you put more weight on objective principles and impersonal facts? Now again, like I said, everyone uses thinking for some decisions and feeling for others, or usually a combination of both, but we do often have a preference. So if you're a feeling person, some of the statements that might describe you are, I have a people or communications orientation. I am concerned with harmony and nervous when it is missing. I look for what is important to others and express concern for others. I make decisions with my heart and want to be compassionate. I believe being tactful is more important than telling the cold truth. Sometimes I miss seeing or communicating the hard truth of situations. And finally, I am sometimes experienced by others as too idealistic, mushy, or indirect. Now on the other side, if you're more of the thinking perspective, comments that might describe you include, I enjoy technical and scientific fields where logic is important. I notice inconsistencies. I look for logical explanations or solutions to almost everything. I make decisions with my head and want to be fair. I believe telling the truth is more important than being tactful. Sometimes I miss or don't value the people part of a situation. And finally, I can be seen as too task-oriented, uncaring, or indifferent. So that gives you kind of an idea of how those two different perspectives differ. Now when you take that Jung typology test, it'll give you a readout on, and a percentage on, are you more feeling or are you more thinking? And this is just a way of helping you look at your decision-making strategies and help further refine how you go about making decisions. Now, the final thing that I want to talk about is cognitive behavioral therapy, because as we talk about the therapy aspect of psychology, cognitive behavior therapy, or CBT, fits very well in this whole thinking versus feeling, or logic versus emotions aspect. So what is cognitive behavioral therapy? Well, it was created by Aaron Beck back in the 70s, I believe. And he theorized that people respond through a combination of cognitive, emotional, and behavioral responses. So we have our thoughts, we have our emotions, and we have our actions. Now, the cognitive system, the way we think and process information, helps us apply meaning to different events, helps us interpret what's going on, helps us figure out what it is we are perceiving. And his theory was that that's the easiest place to intervene. So if I'm depressed, rather than trying to deal with those weird emotions, if I focus on how I'm thinking, the cognitions, if I can change that, then it will result in changing my emotions and changing my behaviors. So if I quit thinking in such a depressed manner, then I will stop feeling so depressed and I will stop acting so depressed. But he really did see it as a triangle where we've got cognitions, emotions, and behaviors, and they all affect each other. So cognitions can affect how we feel and how we act. Emotions act how we think and how we behave, and behaviors affect how we think and feel. But again, CBT focuses on changing our cognitions. And the most basic component of that is addressing automatic thoughts. So what's an automatic thought? Well, a good example is, I'm a failure. Automatic thoughts are just these subconscious messages that we tell ourselves that are typically distorted and not accurate. But so if I'm struggling, if I'm feeling depressed or lack motivation, one of the automatic thoughts that I might be struggling with is that whenever I try to accomplish something, I sit there and tell myself, well, why bother? You're just going to fail. Should I ask somebody out? Or should I try to get a job? Or should I try and take this class? Whenever I'm trying to make that decision, my thinking, my brain is telling me, don't bother, you're a failure, it's not going to work out. Now, this is based on this distortion of our history. When you're depressed, you tend to focus on the negatives. You focus on all the failures. You focus on all the bad things that have happened. And so that's the message that you tend to tell yourself. But that's not accurate. Yeah, maybe sometimes you fail, but sometimes you succeed. For every thing that has gone wrong, we can probably identify several in which things went well. And so therapy focuses on, first of all, learning how to catch those automatic thoughts, being able to identify when you're giving yourself that message, then being able to stop that and give yourself a more accurate message. Rather than, why bother, I'm a failure. Instead, it's, yeah, I've failed in the past, but I've also succeeded when I've tried something like this. So let's give it a shot. So it's not going from the extreme of you suck to you're awesome, but it's trying to wind up somewhere more in the middle there. That's hopefully more realistic. And once you get good at that, on catching yourself and all that negative self-talk that you have, you stop feeling so depressed, and you stop acting so depressed, and start giving yourself a chance to succeed. So that's just a very simple explanation of CBT, but that's a very common theme that we're working with. Okay, so finally, back to sci-fi. So what has all of this been about? Well, for me, this has been a conceptualization of human evolution. Lots of sci-fi shows tend to look at the future of humanity being this cold, logical, rational Vulcan, like Spock. But there's also typically a warning about losing our humanity, our emotional side. losing out on compassion, love, joy, all of those positive emotions that bring a quality of life. So what do you think humans are going to look like in the future? Do we want to get more rational and logical? Do we want to try to cut out some of the emotions, or do we have to keep that and emphasize that? So that's the big question. What's that going to look like? Hope you've enjoyed this one, and we'll see you on the discussion boards.